Mr. Speaker, sir. I thank the Prime Minister, Minister, and the members for participating in this debate. Indeed, it's an honor for Hazel and myself. There has been a lot of discussion and debates on various topics. We understand all the good things that the past reserves will bring to us and bring to our country. But what I want to emphasize today is that all the good things that the Prime Minister, the Minister, and other PAP members have said will not go away, even if we reveal our reserves. And it is right to reveal the reserves to the Singaporeans who are the rightful owners of the reserves. People in the know, like myself, we can make an estimate. Just like any speculators, they can make an estimate from the data, from the statistics released by the government. But Singaporeans need to know. We need to put Singaporeans, all of them, on the same page, because we are all in this together. So all the good things that the Prime Minister, the Minister, the PAP members have said, they are not going to go away after we review our reserves. And the reasons are said afterwards again. And it will not go away if some of the policies that PSP and WP have proposed are implemented. We have already said again and again. Of course, the Prime Minister said, a little here, a little there, you're going down that hole, be careful. And with the wealth of knowledge and experience the Prime Minister has, of course, we'll take his advice very seriously. But at the same time, we still think that Singaporeans of today, there is a sense that they want to do better. But the environment is as such that they seem to be facing a lot of limitations. So we are here talking about better policies than what the PAP is offering today. The PAP policies are not that bad, but we think we can do better together. This is because what we are proposing is only going to slow down the reserve accumulation. And in exchange for that, to postpone the taxes, so as to help Singaporeans cope with inflation and rising property prices. By the way, inflation, rising property prices, we can also say part of it is attributed to the policies of the government. So we are talking about better policies here. And I hope in this chamber, we can discuss and debate things so that we can bring these better policies out and not keep saying that whatever the opposition say, this is going to bring us down. That is not necessarily true. If you look at the details of the things, the policies, the opinions that PSP, and I think, although I can't speak every time for WP, those things that we are proposing. We aim to be a responsible opposition. After today's debate, I'm sure many Singaporeans will continue to be disappointed that the government probably still didn't want to disclose a figure of our financial reserves. Despite all the reasons I've given, that it won't compromise the stability of our Singapore dollar and our economy. Let me elaborate a bit more on that, relying on the experience I have in the financial industry. And also, based on my exchanges with members, Mr. Lian Hua, and the feedback from Mr. Satyandi Supa, and also the feedback from member Sito Yiping. First, I think the issue of defending our Singapore dollar against speculators and the issue of disclosing our reserves are actually two different issues. Because to defend our Singapore dollar against the speculators, first of all, the PAP members had mentioned about the Hong Kong Pact, the George Soros attack on the pound and all that. But they failed to point out that all these are what we call fixed exchange rate system. And of course, the speculators will attack the fixed exchange rate system when there is a mispricing. But our Singapore dollar is essentially a float. It's a floating exchange rate system. So as long as MAS run its monetary policy properly, and we have confidence, full confidence in MAS, and make sure our Singapore dollar value is in line with our economic fundamentals, that is the most important line of defense. And of course, there are short-term speculators who may still come in and try to test and try their luck. Then our MAS today, I would say, have sufficient official foreign reserves to defend ourselves. MAS had 80% has official foreign reserves equivalent to 80% of our GDP. How many countries in the world today have that? That is a very strong defense already. In fact, there are other reasons why MAS have very good control over the forex market, and that is and control over the value of our Singapore dollar. But I wouldn't go too much into that. So we have all the tools and the position and the advantages to defend the Singapore dollar. But to reveal the figure of our reserve to the Singaporean is important for the Singaporeans to have full confidence without any other misconceptions, full confidence and full knowledge of what our country has in the reserves. I hope Singaporeans do not need to wait for another 56 man-years before they get an answer about our financial reserves at least. I'd like to emphasize here again that Singaporeans are the owners of the reserves, and they are entitled to the precise information of at least the financial reserves. Mr. Speaker, sir, I hope that today's debate has helped Singaporeans gain more insight into our public finances and has put more Singaporeans on the same page on Singapore's financial position. Even though the budget and the reserves are very technical topics that may not appeal to many Singaporeans, I've chosen to make many speeches in this House on these issues because they fundamentally impact our cost of living, quality of life, economic competitiveness, income inequality, and social cohesion. It is especially important in the past 2 years because the government has made a number of tax increases that PSP thinks are not necessary. Given the fact that Singaporeans are facing unprecedented problems in terms of cost of living and running away property prices. And anyway, in our opinion at least, our budget and reserves, we still have the leeway. I also hope that by having more discussion on these issues, we can really dispel the misconceptions and fake news relating to our reserves. Today, I don't think the majority of the Singaporeans still are really fully confident that we have over $1 trillion of reserves. Why? Because when you listen to some of the talk on the ground, they say, if we have so much reserves, why the government is keeping our CPF savings? I have to explain to them, actually, these are two different issues. CPF are for your retirement. Has nothing to do with the fact that we don't have reserves. But this is a misconception, nevertheless. And we have to address that. Some fake news in the social media say Singapore has 200%, have external debt equals to 200% of our GDP. You know how we get that? From the government financial statements, because we have total liabilities of about $1 trillion. But those are not real liabilities, actually. But we must explain to the Singaporeans that we have all these assets. If not, the fake news will continue to be there. And of course, all the rumors about the performances of GIC and Temasek, which I think are sometimes very unfair for the fund managers in those two organizations. So I would like Singaporeans to have 3 takeaways from today's debate. First, our financial reserves amount to more than $1.2 trillion, at least. Ms. Hazel Phua has explained 2 methods to calculate this based on the figures published by the government in the government financial statements. This $1.2 trillion, as I mentioned, will also continue to grow. Although the Prime Minister, the Minister, and many members have said that the rate of return on our on the net on the financial reserves are not certain, not for sure. Yes, granted. But there are also other sources of growth. And by the way, the 4% that Prime Minister mentioned about a long-term investment growth, that is a standard assumption made by investment management entities. And that is based on the fact. And of course, you can say that, okay, in a few years' time, the whole world will change. But that 4% or 3%, 3 to 4%, is based on a long-term forecast of the investment returns generated by this investment firm's forecast. I mean, the actual track record of investment based on a universe of asset classes. And this is a standard measure used by the investment firms worldwide. It is not something very special. So we can use 4% or maybe a bit more conservative, 3%. But that is a reasonable number. Because as long as this world, this earth is still intact, human beings will have economic activities, and the economic activities will generate a return. The second takeaway is that the continued accumulation of reserves comes at a cost to Singaporeans. The cost can come in the form of higher taxes, higher property prices, higher cost of living, or lower interest for CPF balances, depending on which of the 5 sources of growth the new reserves come from. Hence, the cost of accumulating reserves have a direct impact on some of the top concerns of Singaporeans, such as the affordability of HDB flats, the rising cost of living, retirement adequacy, prospect for the younger Singaporeans, and a host of other social ills. PSP also would like to continue to grow our reserves at the current rate, if not for the fact that the heavy costs to Singaporeans are becoming more and more apparent, especially with the government's tax increases over the last 2 years. We have asked about the reserves, we have asked about the land sales, NIR, and the government has said all cannot be used. So today, in my debate, I then said, how about the NIR? The NIR also don't seem to be totally used for the benefit of Singaporeans. Of course, I mean, it's a matter of interpretation, but I pointed out some of the NIRC has been locked up. Some of the NIRC has been applied to very long-term infrastructure projects, including coastal and flood protection, all that. Coastal and flood protection. These are our existential problem. Isn't this an example that we should use our reserve or some parts of the reserve and not rely all this on the NIRC, which from the PSP point of view, is supposed to enhance the welfare of Singaporeans so as to avoid the necessity to increase taxes. Of course, you take that away, then you have to increase taxes. The third takeaway is that fortunately, we actually do not need to draw down our reserves, but just slow down the rate of reserve accumulation marginally to produce much better economic outcomes for Singaporeans. And that is the message that opposition has been presenting in this House. We are not being fiscally irresponsible. We are just saying policies can be better. There's no tension between providing for present-day Singaporeans and continue to provide for future generations. Although Ordinary Member Wilkham Naya has cast doubts on that. But I've asked him the question, whether he knows how much reserves we are accumulating each year and how much our policies are going to spend, even at the very worst. The numbers are as follows. We are accumulating reserves by the tens of billions. According to my checking the government financial statements and all that, probably about $50 billion a year, 50 billion to 100 billion, depending on which year it is. And over the last 2 years, we are lucky. When there was a huge influx of capital into our country, the government was able to accumulate an additional $250 billion. Additional reserve over the last 2 years. So with that, we are accumulating reserves at tens of billions, and we are proposing policies that spend at the very worst, a few $billion. Isn't that a win-win situation? Because not that we want to spend the money, but present-day Singaporeans, many needs the money, especially the second half of Singaporeans in terms of income. But this is not happening because the PAP government was overly conservative fiscally and has continued to raise taxes and fees, which will maintain the current rate of reserve accumulation, and in exchange, giving out ad hoc handouts to appease Singaporeans. That's why we are confident that some of our policies, long-term policies, even implemented, it will not lead to a big increase in the budget, because there are so many of these ad hoc schemes that you can actually integrate into some long-term schemes. PSP strongly supports fiscal prudence, but we believe we have set aside too many resources currently, and inadequate spending and investment and heavy overall taxes have weakened the present-day Singaporeans. I'm sure Singaporeans would much prefer to be taxed less than receiving ad hoc handouts from the government. I hope this House today will appreciate that PSP is not even asking for more NIR or land sales revenue for the budget. At least for today, we are not asking. Although we support all these policies, what we are saying today, that even the NIRC has not been totally deployed for the full benefit of Singaporeans. And there's also this artificial deficit created by the current policy of charging land cost on HDB flats. None of the policies that PSP recommended will weaken fiscal prudence and compromise our future ability to spend on any crisis that may come up in the future. In fact, what our policies is aiming at is to increase our social cohesion, improve the conditions and the quality of life of Singaporeans, so that we have a stronger present-day Singaporean core and we can take crisis in our stride. Mr. Speaker, we want Singaporeans to be confident in Singapore's future